Welcome back to the Renaissance Space podcast, where we have the opportunity to listen and better understand life in education. This is episode 50, which we are really excited about. So thank you to everyone who has listened to and supported the podcast so far. I'm Polly. I'm an education advisor within the customer experience team. Prior to joining Renaissance, I was a Senko and inclusion lead in the primary sector. And I appreciate I am a new voice to you today. Our former host, Margaret Allen, has now left Renaissance, so we thank her for the 49 episodes that she did join us for and host. Today, we're joined by Beccie Hawes, CEO at Cadmus Inclusive. Beccie has worked in all aspects of special educational needs, including mainstream, additionally resource provision and specialist settings. She's also got extensive experience as a Senko, inclusion manager, lead local authority advisory SEND teacher, and also as a head of SEND specific support service. So lots of experience and knowledge there. She is also author of the book Demystifying Executive Functioning, a practical classroom guide and toolkit. Now, we're really lucky to have Beccie with us again. She recently joined us in our SEND Searchlights webinar in November, again talking about working memory. So if you'd like to have a look at that episode, please do find it on our website. But for now, let's get started with Beccie. Welcome to our podcast, Beccie. Lovely to have you with us. Before we get started, I just wondered if you'd like to give us a quick introduction as to who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you. So I'm Beccie Hawes. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Cadmus Inclusive. So Cadmus Inclusive is 5 years old, and it's a service that's traded to schools, which consists of specialist SEN advisory teachers and inclusion consultants. We've got a team of counsellors, a team of speech and language therapists, Makaton tutors, sports mentors, and 2 wonderful support dogs. And our job literally is to support schools, to support their children and young people. So schools will come to us and say, we're a bit worried about this child. These are the things that are brilliant about them. These are the things that are tricky in school for them. Can you help? And we'll do assessment work, whole school capacity building and training so that our children have a brighter tomorrow.
Sounds amazing. I'd like to start by asking you about your new book. You talk about demystifying executive functioning. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that schools have about these skills, and why are they so important for learning?
It's a good question to start us off, Polly. Thank you. With my job as a specialist SEN advisory teacher, often the children that come our way are the ones that the staff are saying, we've been looking really carefully at this child, but we can't quite work out what the thing is. What is their barrier to learning? Why are they finding things so difficult? And often when I go and observe that child, I often find that the content of the lesson's really engaging. It's sparky. The children want to join in, but they just don't seem to have quite enough room in their head to do the task and to follow the process. And I think that's because there's a big assumption on our school's part that actually children come into school with the skills that they require in terms of like project management. So I refer to that within executive functioning as being the ability to execute a task, to be organised for it, to maintain that task and to see it all the way through to the end, despite whatever hurdles or challenges come your way. And I think schools assume that children naturally have those skills, but actually many of them, for a number of reasons, haven't. And what we're having to do actually is to say, your content's great, your lesson's really sparking, engaging, but it's a process problem here. And what we need to be doing is to support the children to do that. So children aren't necessarily born task completion ready, and we have to support them to get to that point.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. And thinking about my time as a teacher in the classroom and thinking about maybe some of those students that I missed at the time, what would be some of the sort of key classroom indicators that a child might be struggling in that area?
I think the biggest one for me, when I think back to when I had the pleasure and privilege of being in the classroom, it was the children that on the surface it looked okay, but you just couldn't quite work out what their barrier to learning was or what was the difficulty that meant they couldn't truly flourish. And so I would be looking out for those children that maybe on a surface level look okay, but when you probe it, there are difficulties around perhaps holding information in mind. So if you're doing a project or a task or instruction that requires holding some steps with a strategy, that's going to be perhaps an area of difficulty. These might be children and young people that seem quite reserved or less responsive or not so participatory in group projects. And the reason for that is not because they're being rude or aloof or not getting engaged. It might actually because they're working so hard to hold the information and to process what it is you need them to do and give you the right response quickly, because everything in classrooms has to happen at speed nowadays, that they seem to opt out, but they're not. They're working hard to clear space so that they can hold the information. You might find that these are children that appear to not be paying attention or not good at perhaps following instructions, or the children that lose things. It reminds me of a young man I used to teach who would have to just literally go from one classroom to the next, and by the time he got there he would have lost his pencil case, his jumper, and bumped into something, or even not turned up at your lesson because he's gone walking off in the other direction. High levels of task abandonment. So you look in their workbooks and this child seems to have been working for quite some time, but you've only got one or two lines or not much. Or interestingly, halfway through, for example, in a writing lesson, what you'd started writing about has now become a very different thing, and they've suddenly gone off on a wild tangent. And perhaps children that, yeah, you'd expect them to appear forgetful, perhaps distracted, but a big one for me, I often look for children that seem full. And they're the children that seem to have taken in so much information that they just can't take in anymore. So perhaps they're children that get overwhelmed very quickly in your classroom and as a result end up dysregulated. And that shows itself more through their social, emotional, and mental health. So there's a whole list there. But again, it's thinking beyond that surface, what's underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those examples that you were given, they were just absolute reminders of when I was in the classroom. That particular example of the story writing, and suddenly you'd start on one topic and end up on something different. So familiar. And at the time, I don't think we sort of had the tools or maybe the research or the knowledge to think beyond what's going on there and trying to think of
Yeah.
something that would help.
Yeah.
Um,
And I can
so
remember one child we had in particular would come and sit on the carpet and I would literally go wild with my input. So I'd be dressed as Goldilocks with the porridge, with a puppet, with a video and a picture and everything. And they would transition from the carpet to the table and land at the table and write about their auntie's day out when they went shopping. And I think, what on earth has happened? What did you go to Narnia in between? But actually, that simple distraction of the transition from the carpet to the table had meant that that child's memory process had been interrupted, and so something completely wild and wacky was happening as a result.
yeah, that's so true, isn't it? I think, and as educators, sometimes we sort of overlook those sort of little transitions that we think, oh well, I've told you what you need to do. Now
Yeah.
you need to go and do it. And why would moving from the carpet to a chair be such a huge distraction? So thinking about those things that we know about students and with those working memory barriers, what have been the most effective strategies that you've seen schools use to actually support that?
Yeah, and I think the big thing is two words here: nothing fancy. And that surprises everyone because you're looking for this great big magical intervention that I'm going to deliver for 6 weeks and this child's memory will be fixed, or I'm going to do this wonderful, clever thing in my teaching. But actually, it's about small adjustments as part of your quality first, inclusive, and adaptive teaching. So I call them teaching tweaks. And these are just little bits and bobs that you can do that target the children with perhaps your working memory difficulties. But the gem of the thing for me with what I'm going to list now is those things are vital for some but valuable for all. So actually what you're going to do here is going to help that child and that child and that child, but the whole class and possibly the adults supporting in the classroom, especially when you get to a certain age, it's going to help them too. So some of those things are thinking about how you hold the task for the children. So if you can hold the process or give them a resource or a scaffold that does that for them, the brilliant thing is that takes that bit of mental thinking space out and limits the cognitive load. So now I've got room for content and I've got room for remembering. So things like task slicing, where we take the bigger picture and we break it into several small, tiny little steps, providing perhaps a visual that the child can work through, a little timeline, so that they know exactly what they've done, what's next, and what's after that. Perhaps a voice recording device so that they can record the teacher's instructions when they're given, or record their own thoughts, or use that voice recording device to hold a sentence for them. Visual task timelines and timelines for the day. I think you've just got to ramp up your visuals in a much bigger way and slow down your teaching and give the children actual time to process, think about what you've got to do, think about what that response is going to be, and then respond, because often we're too pacey in our classrooms. And another big one for me is recording any transient information. So we do loads of talking in the classroom, but if you can't remember all of that talking, it's not going to work. So perhaps jottings on your whiteboard, drawing a picture, recording it with a voice recording device, and encouraging the children to develop the skills to do that independently so you can get on and teach. But anything that clears the cognitive load in terms of process is going to give you space for content and for thinking.
Amazing. And that was sort of my next question that I think you've answered in a way, but it was a question around how do those visual aids and those consistent routines sort of act as that backup system for a student whose working memory is overloaded? What is actually happening by giving somebody a visual? What's
Yeah.
going on there?
Yeah, it reminds me of making a cup of tea. I think there's a great thing we do in England. When something's gone wrong, we'll have a cup of tea and that'll make it all better. And I was trying to figure out the other day, what is it about the cup of tea that makes it better? Or am I not drinking the same tea as everyone else? But actually, I decided it isn't the cup of tea that is the thing that makes you feel better. It's the ritual. It's the warming the pot, the putting the tea in the teapot, the pouring it, the letting it stand, the stirring. I think routine is really important to human beings, and that routine of making the tea is the bit that makes you feel better. So in our classrooms, if you've got really well embedded routines or really good high quality visuals that children can follow independently, what you're actually doing is giving them a sense of safety and security. So they know if this all goes wrong and I can't remember, actually my routine will click in, or I know there is a visual at the front. A bit like if you've ever had a child come to you to ask you to spell a word. So I had a little girl the other day, can you help me spell burglar? Can you write it down for me? And for the life of me, I could not remember. And I sort of looked and thought, do you mean thief? But I thought, because I can spell that. So we went with burglar. But I did something rather magical. I put my pen on a piece of paper and the word burglar just came out of the pen. So it's a routine, isn't it? That's my motor memory. And I think with children, they click into routines really well. You tell the children to line up, off they all go. I think it's amazing in a school that we can get hundreds of children through lunchtime and they have a 2 to 3 course meal and all play and all wash their hands. But if you know what to do and it's embedded and it's ingrained, again, that takes up less space in your mind. So you just click in, you get it done, you've got more space for everything else. So those are actually two really important tools in lightening the cognitive load.
Oh, fantastic. And I was just thinking when again, when I was teaching and I was trying to support children with that sort of working memory overload, I would often try and chunk down instructions, like you said earlier. In terms of chunking, I never quite knew how far to go and what to do. Like, was it the case of you need to pick up a pencil, then you need to use a ruler? Is that individually
Yeah.
specific, or how can you give an example of chunking?
I think I'll show you what not to do to start with. I think the biggest thing for me is that we get teachers stand at the front and they go, right, after you've finished writing the date, turn to your friend, tell them 3 things you learned in the last lesson. Then I need you to show me you're ready to listen with your pencil in your hands. And so straight away you've got this child doing after the what, because they're not all in the instructions in the right order, and the instruction was very long, and you might only remember one bit. And I actually saw this in an observation done, and all the children stopped writing the date, didn't speak, and just sat and looked, showing the teacher they were ready to listen with a pencil because they could only remember the last bit. Bit like in early years when you give out all of the amazing choices, because we go, right, this morning, children, we've got 53 different choices, and you just go down the list, and the children either go to the sand or water because that's reliable and the routine clicks in, or they do the last thing the teacher said because that's the one I can remember. And I think you're right, Polly. Do you get into the minutiae of sit on your chair, pull your chair in? Where do you start? When do you end? I think you've got to know your children really well. And you've got to know how much roughly they can hold. So sometimes it's worth testing that hypothesis by issuing instructions of just one chunk. Okay, we all got that. 2 chunks, still there. 3, oh, it's got a bit wobbly over here. So you know that's kind of the issue. The biggest trick I do is to use a small voice recording device. Could be a talking tin, a sound button, a postcard. Really cost pence, not expensive. And as I give the instruction out, I do it in tiny stages, but I record it at the same time and do the whole thing. So I'll say, first, I need you to, then, next, finally, and then I've done the whole thing. And then I hand that talking tin, the sound button, the postcard, whatever it is, to the child that needs it. And they can play those instructions over and over again in whatever length of time and chunk that they choose. And even better, I have had it where I say to children, I'm about to give an instruction, and 4 or 5 of them hold up their voice recording devices and I give out the instruction. I've done it, that's with early years children, so it definitely works further up school. But they literally hold it, record it, and then they'll just play it back over and over again. So they can literally tailor make it to them. It's brilliant.
And I think, like you said right back at the beginning of our conversation, it's nothing fancy, is it? It's a couple of resources might be needed, but actually nothing fancy at all. So I'm sort of going to flip it on its head now. So we know that these strategies can really support the children. But thinking back again to your life in the classroom, I felt I was constantly giving out instructions and I was constantly going over things. And actually, it was making my time management as a teacher less efficient. So how do these strategies also help the teacher's job? How does it reduce that consistent need for repetition and management? I know, like you've said there, a great strategy with the talking tins that actually you're recording yourself as you're giving the instructions, so you're not having to give those steps out again. But is there anything else that we could add to that?
The thing for me that makes it so efficient with all that sort of stuff is I'm doing less repetition. I'm having less interruptions from children because they don't keep coming back going, I don't know what to do. Can you tell me again? Or less of those moments where you end up positively infuriated because you're looking at this child thinking, why haven't you started work? You know what to do. And then I say to you, I'm thinking. And often those children genuinely are thinking because they're trying to retrieve what it is you said. And I think anything there that you can use, like those talking tins, or drawing a quick visual timeline. I think in some classrooms now we've got obsessed with everything's got to be beautifully made and printed and laminated. And well, no, actually, because the best teaching is adaptive, and adaptive happens in the here and the now. So you make this quick formative assessment, spot where it's going wobbly, and you get in there quick. So for me, sometimes I've got my mini whiteboard and I carry it around with me, and I'll spot a child who's gone wobbly, and rather than repeat the instruction or record it, we draw a timeline together of what the task looks like. So I'll perhaps just quickly make it like a checklist with pictures of what they need to do that I have furiously scribbled, or even better, they have quickly scribbled, and that they can use. And that's a nice thing because actually there's nothing stopping them doing that in the lesson instruction independently as you go through what you want to teach. Anything like that, again, coming back to it, means I've limited cognitive load, so there's less repetition. I can actually focus on the content and misconceptions around that rather than teaching the process and getting lost in that. So we've got a very knowledge-based curriculum now, so we can dive straight into all of that really effectively. But yeah, mini whiteboards all the way, voice recording devices all the way, definitely.
Fabulous. And I really like the way that you referred to it as being adaptive teaching. You've given a verbal instruction, and actually, if that's not quite worked or that's not quite sunken in, then you can back it up with a visual. And it just reminded me of when you're speaking with people who speak a different language, and rather than change the way you talk, you just speak louder. Or
Yeah,
slower, and
and
say
slower.
exactly the same thing, and it doesn't make a difference. So actually at that point you might turn to a visual, mightn't you, and draw it all out so that you can see it in a different way. So
It's like if you need to find the toilet and it's written in loads of different languages, you can't. But we've all got a commonality, haven't we? Which is we can all spot the golden arches of McDonald's in any country that you're in. So I think
yeah.
gesture is really important. Makaton signs really important because those are visuals. Actually, it's another way in.
Thank you, Beccie. So here at Renaissance, we do have Recall, which is our digital test that does identify whether there is an executive functioning barrier with our students, which is really helpful. I wish I'd had it when I was teaching to really get to understand our students. So that's sort of one thing that we can use to help us identify those students who are finding working memory processing a little bit difficult and it is getting in the way of their learning. Really difficult question probably, but if you were to choose one small but meaningful change tomorrow to better support those learners with working memory needs, what would you recommend? And I know that's really hard because you said, oh, I'm talking tins and whiteboards, but if people
Yeah,
listening
yeah,
were
yeah,
like, well,
yeah.
what's the one thing that tomorrow I could
One
take in
thing,
and
and
change?
so, because I've already got my mini whiteboard and my talking tin in my little apron, my penny with the pockets in, I'd go back a stage further, and I ask colleagues to say, "All right, you when you're planning the lesson, rather than thinking about all these magical resources, I want you to actually evaluate the working memory load. What is the cost of what you're asking this to do for your children? And is that realistic for them?" According to their age and or their stage of development. So then, from the off, you can then think, actually, we're doing a lesson where we're going to be timesing numbers together. So I might be doing 420 times 12. So for some of my children, that could be really tricky because they've got to do 420 times 10, 420 times 2. They've then got to hold all that and add it together and give you an output. So there's a lot there, isn't there? So then I just quickly think, right, where is it then? I'm going to introduce one of my scaffolds, my tools, my resources, or change up my approach. So actually, it's not having the magical classroom cupboard of stuff. It's being savvy from the off in terms of this is actually the cost of that. Because if you think about what actually really is involved, then you're not going to fall down in your lesson because you're going to be proactive about supporting it.
Great. So actually it is, like you say, getting to know your learners and
Yeah.
knowing who you've got in front of you. Another question, I don't know whether this one's a tricky one or not. It was an interesting one to me anyway. But do you think you can train working memory, or is it a fixed capacity? So if you know you've got a student who does struggle with holding on to that information and processing it, can we also support them to strengthen their memory, or do we just need to make sure we are really good at implementing those strategies such as scaffolding and visuals?
I've got like an interesting case study the other day because I was in a school doing some monitoring and a lovely teaching assistant walked past me with 6 very excited little year 2 people. And I said to them, "Where are you going?" "We're going to play our memory games." And so off they went. And then I was speaking to the TA in the staff room and I said, "So how's that going?" And she went, "Well, he started off remembering 3 things, but now he can remember 7 things when we play My Granny Went to Market, the shopping basket game where you add a bit every time." I said, "So, oh, do you think his memory's improving then?" And she went, "No, I think he's just getting better at playing the game." And when I said to her, "What's your evidence base? Where does that come from?" She said, "He can't remember anything in class. He's always losing stuff. It's no better outside of our intervention." And so that got me thinking. And I said to her, "Well, perhaps what could you do to add an extra dimension that's going to make your children really understand what it is they're doing in that game and how they can transfer that to the lesson?" So we did some work on metacognition, that being aware of how you learn, if it's working, and what you do if you don't. So the children were actually doing a really good job of visualizing what was in Granny's shopping basket and hooking one thing onto another. So we made that extra explicit in the game. And then in the classroom, we prompted them, do you remember when we played Granny Went to Market? What did you do? And they would suddenly sit and close their eyes and listen really carefully. And they'd suddenly got better because actually what were they doing? Applying the skill, using it wisely in the classroom. Because what happens with our memory interventions, children get better at playing the game, but they don't actually get better in terms of their memory recall because it isn't something you can make bigger. What you can do is compensate. But again, what children don't do is they go and have a marvelous time playing the game, but they don't realize that that is a learning opportunity that applies to the classroom. So that extra bit of explicit teaching and that use of metacognition made a huge difference. So I actually think your memory is your memory. It's a skill. We can develop skills, but we've got to be extra explicit about what those skills are and what they look like in the classroom so children know how to use them.
It's so interesting that they saw that it was a game and they didn't actually see what it was benefiting them from in a
Yeah. I mean, they had a
wider
marvelous
context.
time, which is
And
great, but we want a bit more.
yeah, absolutely. And I think slightly off topic, but I think with any intervention, that's the bit, isn't it? So many teachers or TAs, they go and do the intervention and it's great and they have a good time and you see progress, and then back in the classroom it's as if nothing has happened. So it is
Yeah.
about being explicit that we're learning this to then apply in a wider context, which obviously is the same with working memory.
We refer to it as the Narnia effect. This child goes off, you see them having some incredible work done with some incredible TAs. They come back to the classroom and they're like, oh, just, and you're like, when actually it's just getting that link up between the two, vital.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thinking sort of wider, so we've talked a lot about the children in the classroom and what the teachers can do and what support staff can do. So let's go a bit wider and think about school leadership, because actually to make these things have a positive impact and to embed them and to really see that progress for students, it's sort of got to be a school-wide buy-in, I suppose. So have you got any tips? Because I know you're so inclusive in your setting. Have you
Yeah.
got any tips to support school-wide policies or curriculum to actually make it a wider impact?
So I'm massive on leading by example. So if I want the children in my school to do it, I do it too. So I walk around exactly how I expect the children to walk around. I respond to the children how I expect them to respond to me and the other teachers in the schools that we go into. So actually, the first thing I do is make it okay to forget. And I talk to the children and to the staff really openly and honestly about when I've forgotten. And I'm sorry about that. It happens, we're human. And so then I show them how it's okay for me to have the things that I have as a supposed grown up to make my memory work. So I show them that I've got a diary. I show them I've got a special app on my phone with reminders. I show them that I've got lists and post-it notes and a whole color-coded system. And so the children actually then realise that everyone forgets. And actually, we've got someone in our school who we all sort of look at who should be, she should be really good at this stuff, but she has to work as hard as we do to be able to remember things. And she's got lots of really cool tricks, just like in the classroom, I've got my talking tin and my mini whiteboard. But then it's about being really explicit with your staff that actually, yes, the curriculum is really fast and at pace, but it's okay for you in your lesson to build in extra processing time. It is okay in your lesson to repeat, and that is based on your formative assessments as you look around the room. We also think carefully about the process support. So at the curriculum writing and the curriculum design stage, we're putting in there what supports we would like to see for children. So it's already written in so that staff know it's not you've got to if you want to. It's a given and it's a must because it's there and it's written in. And we also think really carefully and explicitly about how we sequence our curriculum as a spiral. So you're going to learn this stuff and we'll support you with recalling it, but then you're going to come back to it again and add a new bit and come back to it again and add another new bit. And within that, here are some suggested skills and scaffolds. I also think it's interesting to allow your staff in schools to maybe every so often just have a memory skills lesson. So we talk about memory and we learn some tips and tricks and compensatory strategies together with a high level of metacognition. So then you can be in the middle of science and say, do you remember when we had our special lesson about the memory? We used this strategy so we could recall lots of things. We're going to use it now to learn how we'll remember this special word. So that sort of thing works beautifully.
Sounds fabulous. Really helpful tips and tricks there. So moving our conversation on again, and thinking about actually parents and carers, because I'm sure it's very similar in your setting, but I used to have so many parents saying they've forgotten their reading record, they've lost a shoe, they've lost a jumper. I'm really sorry, they've come home without their pencil case.
Yeah.
And I remember I did have a resource that actually it was like a little tag they could attach to their bag, and it was little buttons of things they could remember in the morning. So have you packed your
Yeah.
reading book, have you got your lunchbox? But obviously that does have a cost associated to it, and that's not fair to ask all parents to do. But what can we do to support parents and carers who are equally pulling their hair out at home sometimes because their children are forgetful or they can't remember what day of the week it is? What can we do to help them as well?
Everything you've described there, I feel the pain because I'm a mum of 4 boys, and yet the amount of recorders, PE kits, lunch boxes we've gone through over the years is unbelievable. But also, I'm a teacher and I know about these things. My husband's not in education. He'd sometimes sit to do homework with the children, and he'd say, "Well, this is supposed to be something you've done at school today. We haven't done this. Teacher hasn't taught us this." And actually, I knew full well their teachers had. They just couldn't remember, or perhaps had psychologically blocked it out. But I'm going to go with can't remember. And so to support parents, I think it's things like perhaps a parent workshop where you can get the parents to come in and show them some of the resources and the way that you approach remembering in school. So you can show them that the voice recording devices, the mini whiteboards, that kind of thing. But you can also show them the tips, the tricks, and the strategies that are for free. Things we do like revisiting stuff, rehearsal, retrieval practice over spaces, making a flashcard, those sorts of things. And you can also talk to them about in your life, how would that work? So, do you leave notes for your children on the fridge? Can they leave notes that are important to them there? Could you pack your school bag the night before together? Could you draw a picture on some paper of the things they should have on the right day and put it by the door? Those sorts of things. And a biggie, when you send home homework, you might at the top of the sheet or in the book with the homework put a little task timeline for what it is they've got to do. And maybe a little note to say, do you remember in history we talked about? Because that might just be the hook that makes them go, hang on a minute. Yes, we did talk about Marie Curie. Yeah, then I can access my homework. So those little tips and tricks, really. And I think the other thing is you say to parents, they're children. Children are designed to forget. They do that. It's a thing. Don't worry. Actually, let's just keep all the stress around it low, because actually it makes it far worse.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's been an amazing conversation, Beccie. Thank you so much. I think what I've taken away from it is what you said right at the beginning, is that it's nothing fancy and it's about routine. So although that makes it sound really simplistic, it's actually just going back to those basics, isn't it? And slowing things down a bit, allowing that processing time, not putting that pressure on. And you can see the impact that it has on the children then. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely to have you with us for our Renaissance Space podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Beccie. Lots of useful tips, tricks, and strategies. One of my biggest reflections is that interventions or support strategies don't have to be elaborate and costly. They can be discreet and simple, and something that can be implemented as quickly as tomorrow for really positive outcomes. Don't forget that Beccie's book, Demystifying Executive Functioning, a practical classroom guide and toolkit, is out now. It's a fantastic read and accessible to all. You can find more information about Recall, our working memory assessment, at gl-assessment.co.uk/recall 2026. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please do take a moment to rate and review us. And don't forget that you can catch up on all previous episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search for the Renaissance Space podcast. Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from our colleagues at GL Assessment. Thank you.